Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 68 of the Citrix session. I'm your host, Andy Whiteside. I've got Bill Sutton, Director of Services at XenTegra. Bill, how's it going?
Going well, Andy. Thanks.
How is the world of managing projects and people?
Oh, like it always is, moving targets, shell game. But it's, the month of March has been a challenge, but things are looking up.
So counting our other companies that we own and the people that we have under contract and others, how many total Citrix or just in general XenTegra consultants do we interact with on an annual basis that are more or less part of our team?
On an annual basis, it's probably close to 20.
Okay. That counts internal and external?
Internal and external, yes.
So I find that interesting because, that means us as a total company, we're in the neighborhood of 60 people total, which, that's not a huge technology company, but as far as Citrix partners go and having 60 people that focus on Citrix related, EUC related technologies and consulting services, that's pretty big.
Yep.
We have with us Ben Rogers. Ben is the local sales engineer here and the healthcare engineer, or one of the healthcare sales engineers. Ben, how's it going?
I'm doing well, Andy. And me personally, I was a little shocked to hear that you had that many employees working under your belt. That's a lot of different mouths to feed, people to manage, projects to manage. So congratulations getting that many people under your belt. And I wish you continued success in the next 3 quarters of 2021.
So counting all the...
I do have a question for you.
There's about 45 full-time XenTegra employees, another 20 contractors. A lot of them are on contracts and under some type of agreement where we pay them even though they're not an employee. I'll tell you 2 quick stories, Ben. One, I try not to think about the monthly payroll because that number would scare me to death if I actually looked at it. I haven't looked at it in probably 3 or 4 years. And then the other part is it's interesting to me when I get a phone call or make a phone call into our help desk and I meet somebody for the first time and I have no idea who it is.
Yeah. And they say they know you?
Well, they just work for us. And I'm like, I had no idea you worked for us. Welcome to the team. It's when you own a business, there's chasms you have to cross. That's like the number 3 chasm where it gets too big and you have no idea what's underneath you. You just have a leap of faith that it's there and you just keep walking.
Yeah. So that brings me to a question that I have for you and for Bill. So, I know you guys are a great Citrix partner, but Citrix is not the only product that you guys support because within the Citrix environment, you have lots of other products working with each other like antivirus, security, firewalls, blah, blah, blah. So how do you and Bill not only manage your Citrix talent, but find, manage, and know what other talent you might need as it comes to a Citrix environment wall to wall with all the pieces that are needed to really make it sing?
Yeah, it's a constant evolution. But if you're in this industry, as long as Bill and I have been in it, and Moen, who runs our XenTegra Canada business, if you've been in it that long, you know that most of the products in this space come from a DNA around Citrix. So a lot of the stuff kind of is similar. That's for sure. And then also you have people with pockets of expertise. The 2 things at XenTegra that are most important for our internal staff would be Citrix and all the things that fall out of that sky, and Azure, Microsoft Azure are the 2 that pretty much everybody has to be working on all the time, trying to get better at, and having their back pockets and front pocket and in their little cargo shorts if needed.
That's interesting.
Bill, any other technologies?
Well, I would certainly add to that, a lot of the Citrix ecosystem type products that have come up over the years, and probably the key one that we are, really strongly engaged with is iGel for the endpoint. So, just about all of our guys have iGel knowledge, as well as the others that Andy mentioned.
Yeah.
Among other things, of course. But, like you said, Ben, a lot of these things touch Microsoft and they touch Active Directory, certificate services, security. So we have the ability to draw from our internal and external resources to help satisfy those needs when necessary. But everybody has a base level of knowledge, obviously, in terms of being able to to implement a Citrix solution.
And Bill, wouldn't you agree that your journey through the Citrix world started off narrow and then it got wider and wider and wider and wider? And now because of some of the things as a service, it's becoming less wide, but still as capable?
Yes, I would agree with that completely.
Yeah.
Oh, the portfolio is wide. I mean, even for me being a Citrite, trying to learn everything and how everything works. I mean, you know, I just learned something about our ADC product the other day, as far as our ADCs can do micro segmentation within a data center. And I never knew that. I considered the ADC basically a border appliance. You know, things are coming out, coming into it. It's kind of figuring out where it goes, proxying things, but then to be in a meeting and the guy talk about east-west traffic and putting an ADC in there, and I was like, there's no way an ADC can do that. And then the engineer started whiteboarding it for us. I was like, oh, wow, it can do that. And you know, so it's just, our product portfolio is so wide that it's a constant evolution and a constant learning.
Well, think about it like this. At one point, there were 4, and this is before the service, 4 Citrix gateways and totally different products.
But it kind of goes back to the question. We have this come up on occasion. A customer will call in and say, I need help with my Citrix environment. And I'm like, okay, what part of your Citrix environment? My Citrix environment. Well, you're talking about ADC, you're talking about SD-WAN, you're talking about CVAD, you're talking about CVAD service. Used to be that was a very easy question to answer. Not so much now.
Yep, exactly. That's very true.
So guys, our topic for today is written by Elisa Eve. It's called The Journey to Citrix Workspace and the Value Along the Way. This is going to be more of a philosophical and business conversation, really relevant for today's world and specifically for XenTegra, because we just, you know, we've kind of lived the Citrix journey. We've recently moved from really having everybody using local devices to people using more virtual desktops 2 and 3 years ago. And then now we're trying to get the entire organization to move over to Citrix Workspace, either through their browser or through the Workspace app. And what I've found interesting about that is it's, you know, the challenging work environment has kind of driven us to that. At the same time, when we fully started implementing Citrix Workspace, we find that individuals within a company are now starting to use it because it helps them, not because we're mandating it. So the article here starts off by talking about how many, you know, a year ago people were sitting at their desk and they were just working the way they had for many years, and then they kind of got shifted into a digital transformation during the middle of the pandemic because they had to, and it really accelerated the journey there. Ben, have you seen a lot of customers that are living that exact scenario?
Well, yeah, I mean, there was the rush to get people set up, and you know, at first it was whatever we need to do to get them hooked back up to the environment, whether it be VPN or leveraging Citrix or RDP or whatever. So in the first part of the pandemic, it was just whatever Band-Aid can we put in place to stop the bleeding that we gotten going on. And then over time, people have come back to us and said, hey, we realize what we've done is not the best and we would like to do it better. And we need it to be sustainable. So to a point of this article, you know, the first part of the article talks about we left the office and a lot of us thought we would be back in 2 or 3 months. We didn't realize this was going to be a year-long journey. And then I'll give you an example like today, Citrix themselves, you know, are just now starting to release, you know, information to the employees about when they think we'll be able to come back to the office. And even when we do come back to the office, it will be a phased approach. So, yeah, I definitely see where businesses, customers of mine, myself have had to kind of reinvent themselves and how they use technology during this pandemic world. Because for me, like, you know, printing was real interesting for me, you know, and as people say, you're in a digital world, there's some things I like to have printed. That was a challenge for me at first because I never had to print from home. I always had somewhere I could go and print and take it with me. And so it's just been interesting to see just different things that have come up over our journey in the past year and how we've had to adapt and how we've had to transform into, you know, a business digital real estate.
And Bill, are you seeing your own journey kind of evolve around this process? Are you still, I mean, you're a big time power user because of your job. Have you been able to take more usage and get more benefit out of digital workspaces during all this, or have you been an entrenched knowledge worker for all this time remotely and it didn't really matter to you?
Probably more an entrenched
Go ahead, sorry.
worker myself, but I have started, now that we have begun shifting into more of a digital workspace environment, I'm leveraging that more and more on a daily basis as a means of getting to the resources that I need. I don't use a virtual desktop as much as I'd like to, and I'm planning to increase that. But I'm a laptop worker, but all the resources that I access are typically either in Citrix or they're single sign-on to a SaaS-based app.
And I think it's interesting for me personally, because I'm kind of making myself, but at the same time,
Right.
I find it that I'm being compelled and drawn to a digital workspace. I have multiple things I do throughout the week that I just can't remember how to get there. And when I go into my digital workspace, it's just there. And another great example of that, we have a March Madness tournament going on within the company, and I looked in our workspace the other day, and all of a sudden the March Madness SaaS or app is in there. I'm like, oh wow, that's great. I'm glad, and we're using secure browser to present that to ourselves. It's interesting to see our own company evolve. Now, part of my story is I'm becoming less of a techie and more of a sales and business guy all the time. And so I wonder how much a role that plays in it versus being drawn to the abilities of a digital workspace. Ben, you're kind of in a sales role and an engineer role. Do you use a digital workspace, specifically the Citrix one, every day?
Oh yeah, I do. I mean, there's like, if I've got to do something in Salesforce, I don't necessarily open up my desktop anymore. Now, I do want to ask you two a question, because this is something that I have actually been affected by with the pandemic. You're talking about using software and how that's changed in a digital workspace. How has your use of the hardware changed? Like, I've noticed during this pandemic that I've become more reliant on my phone, on my tablet, and I'm still very much reliant on my desktop like I'm sitting at now. But there have been times during this pandemic where I've had to rely on, Teams on my phone, or Citrix Session on my phone, or Citrix Session on my tablet. And I've kind of gotten more mobile during this time than I was before. Before, I was the type of person where I would do work on my desktop at home. I would drive to the office. If anything came up to the office, I'd basically cell phone it, but nothing that I would be interacting with digitally. And I have become more adept to do that during the pandemic than I was before.
So mine's interesting because I didn't really change anything. When I come into my office, I use either a Chrome-based PC to access my environment, including SaaS and Citrix Workspace, or Citrix Workspace now only, or I boot into an iGel operating system on my PC at my desk. And the number one reason for that's got nothing to do with the pandemic. It's because, well, the pandemic kept me from traveling as much, but the number one reason I do it is I'm just too lazy to get my laptop out.
There you go.
But Bill, you I guess, Ben, it's probably hard for Bill and I to talk about that because, well, Bill, he probably wasn't traveling that much. So he's probably been sitting down in the same chair for the last 2 years with or without the pandemic and doing the same thing, I assume.
Pretty much, yes.
But Ben, I am excited to see how me moving to specifically the Citrix Workspace app and the Citrix Workspace service, when I start to travel again, which will probably be in July, September timeframe, if I, find my life easier because I have that one technology to lean on instead of trying to find my way through a plethora of technologies to get it done on whatever device.
Right.
Yeah. And a lot of companies are starting to do that. The idea, Andy, you and I talked many, many years ago about removing the Windows desktop. And at that time, you very strategically advised me against it. And I remember the conversation because I was like, why would you go against that as much of a virtualization proponent as you are? And you put it, quite frankly, it's not a technology thing. It is a social thing. It is, you would, as you put it, you would send the users through a divorce if you made them separate themselves from the desktop. I think we're at that bridge where we can start to introduce, dashboard type technology and make it work across all the different devices. Yes, you're going to have some application stuff, but those applications could be launched from a dashboard. I'm really intrigued with this micro app technology that we've got coming down the pipe and how that's going to change how we work with our devices. So for me right now, I think it's a very exciting time, and I think users are more than ready to be transformed into the next wave of technology, which in my opinion is going to be more dashboard based, more user-centric, work-related based, and I kind of really see that's where it's going. And I think that's where our company, Citrix, is really ahead of the curve, man. That's where we're building our technology to go to.
Yep. And Ben, for our users out there that are just now getting to a point where they virtualize a desktop, they're not wrong. It just might be that you get that virtual desktop, and from that virtual desktop, you go into some dashboard type scenario like you're talking about. It might be, a layering type effect, or they may use an iGel thin client like we do to get into that dashboard type of effect. Or when they're remote and, using a mobile device or working from home, it's just all dashboard, and they never even see a virtual desktop. But in theory, they don't ever have to even know. It just kind of happens when they log in.
Well, I think from an onboarding perspective, it certainly changes the whole game here. When you onboard someone, it literally is, here's your username and password. You change it the first time, and you get provisioned all the apps you need. And if it's set up the right way, that app, you could get to a virtual desktop if you need to get to a virtual desktop. But if you're running a lot of SaaS apps, brokering that, federating that AD authentication somewhere through the workspace, that's really all they need. They get to that workspace and get to everything they need to on day one.
So XenTegra is hiring 6 people starting in April, maybe more. Honestly, I don't even know, but I know it's at least 6. And with the idea that we're going to be able to tell them one app to use and one website to go to with or without that app, I'm excited to watch them experience that and on board in a world of digital workspace where all I have to do is say, you sell what you just did, get it, and they'll be able to get it.
Right.
It's funny. We just did a required demo for one of the products we've got coming out, Secure Internet Access. And one of the things Citrix really wanted us to concentrate on was user experience. So one of the things I did was I actually role played as an insurance agent. And I basically didn't mention any of the products that we used to do this demo. I just went through the day in the life of a user. And, it was just interesting how when you put yourself in the user's shoes and you drive through our products, how you see the efficiency and the deficiency of the things. But I think users today, I think one thing the pandemic has done, and I think mobility has done, is it's now opened our eyes to, we don't need the full-blown desktop anymore. We now can go with more of a dashboard, feed me the things I need, feed me the things I want, what I don't even show it to me. And I see, like these micro apps where we're taking functionality of the monolithic app, and in my field, the EMR app. And if we can place little, snippets of functionality that people can do real easily and get it done in the major workflow tasks, we're getting closer to it. I mean, I really do. You think about time. I'm looking, 3-5 year window. I think we'll be there. So it's just a real interesting time right now for me. And every what is it? What's the saying in politics? Every disaster has the silver lining, or take advantage of it. I think with the pandemic, users themselves have taken time to kind of readjust themselves with technology.
Yeah.
Now, let's talk about how that's going to look when we come back to the office and people have to come back to some of the old ways. What I wonder is, and I would wonder if I would go in this myself, would there be a reject of how I used to do it? And will we adopt more of the way I do it now? Because the way I work now and the way I work between my home, car, my son's school's parking lot was totally different than the way I worked when I went to an office 8 to 5 a year and a half ago.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing too is, so we're talking about onboarding new employees a minute ago and talk about working different. I literally just got a message in Teams from Citrix Workspace from one of the new employees that just onboarded. I didn't have to go tell him to stop sending me emails, use Teams. He just automatically did it. I think that's partially because we facilitated it, and also because the world has evolved to the point where people don't look to send an email. They look for their digital workspace and how to leverage it without being told.
But you probably got a problem I have now, and that's running between Teams and Slack. I predominantly have digested Teams because I'm a newer employee, but there's still Slack out there. But I have noticed days where I'll get into Teams right first thing in the morning, and like today, it won't be until after this meeting before I get in Slack. And I feel like there's a little bit of a danger there. You know, at some point, communication systems are going to have to consolidate. You're going to have to pick one or the other. We can't continue to use both.
Well, so that's true. At the same time, if your Workspace app is getting alerts and notifications from Teams and Slack, why do you care at the moment when you're seeing what you need to see come in through that one pane of glass, aka Citrix Workspace?
That's true. You've got a point there. I'll give you that one. I just, from a management standpoint and just efficiency standpoint, and you know, Bill and yourself can speak more to this than I can. I would imagine from a cost standpoint,
oh yeah,
it's a little bit of money to run both those platforms.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, in my world, you add Teams, Podio, Salesforce, Slack. I've got 6 figures worth of portals. I promise you. Okay. But Ben, that's a good point. Ultimately, it comes down to cost of running a business, and that's why Teams, which is part of your Microsoft 365 license, is going to win out in a lot of occasions and a lot of situations, because why have 5 different ones when I'm already paying for one that's either the best or close to the best now?
In my opinion, Andy, you just released the elephant in the room. Not only Teams, but WVD is going to have a big stake here in the future, man. I think a lot of customers are going to look at that investment and go, you know, what can we do to leverage there? And again, I think that's not a threat to Citrix, in my opinion. That's just going to make Citrix look stronger because of how we better scale, manage that environment. So we would love for customers to take advantage of their WVD licenses. What you'll find is that it's going to be an easier scale and management experience under the Citrix Cloud umbrella.
Right. We have customers doing that right now, Ben. Taking
I can just imagine
of using Citrix with Windows 10 multi-session, which is basically WVD.
Yeah, I could just imagine.
So guys, I did want to talk about something else Ben brought up a minute ago, and that's the actions piece where you're getting notifications, and I've mentioned it as relates to Teams. It's Teams and Slack and others. In our system, we have these generic ones coming from this bogus Workday and bogus ServiceNow API calls, and it's interesting to watch the sales team get a little turned off by it and go, hey, why am I getting this stuff? How do I get rid of it? I'm like, well, here's how you get rid of it for that moment. But they'll keep coming back because it's a really good demo for customers. But stop for a minute and understand why it's valuable to be getting proactive information from systems like a ServiceNow or a Salesforce or a Sudi Expense in our situation, saying that, hey, I need this work, I need this approved, so that, as Ben was talking about, you don't just start in one portal in the morning and not realize that people need you in 5 other portals. Those actions coming to you is better than you having to go look all the time.
I tell you, who's been a big proponent when I've talked to micro apps, who's gotten the biggest, kind of glee in their eye, has been education. And they've looked at some of the micro app technology as far as notifying students of different various events. I've been surprised, man. A lot of education customers have gone, hey, we want to learn more about that. They're not doing anything with it today. But again, they go, as kids come back to class, as we start new semesters, this could be a good sounding board or a message board to present information to the students and push information to them. And we started talking to some of these as more of how do we get your employees back into the school. And now that conversation has, reached out to, now we're looking at solutions for the students. So it's interesting how when you position the micro apps in front of people, how they kind of digest it and see how they could work in their environment.
Yeah. Well, I think the micro apps can go back to some degree, Ben, to your earlier statement about information overload, and to the extent that you do it right. When you do it right, if you have Slacks and you have Teams, to Andy's point, you bring all that into the workspace, but you got to do it in a way that's smart, because you don't just want to take all of that noise and put it somewhere else. It needs to be kind of massaged and filtered, and you can choose what needs to be important and what doesn't need to be important, and then it's going to be a lot more user friendly at that point. Because I know for me, I'll get notifications or I'll get communications from customers or from consultants in Slack, and then maybe I'll get them in email, and then maybe I'll get them in Teams, And a couple of days later, when I go to try to find that again, for some reason, I'm searching everywhere, man. And it drives me nuts. Where did I see this? And having that, you know, in a centralized place where we might be able to get to it, you know, easier is going to be something that's really important.
Yeah. Hey, Ben, you've got this blog up. I guess I'll rely on you and Bill, but the middle of it has a chart and a table in it. And across the top, it says capability maturity model for the first column, digital workspace transformation process for the second, steps to the journey in Citrix Workspace service, and then finally the value. I'm not going to ask us to go through every one of these. That would take more than the 45 minutes we have. But what is the author trying to do here by carving this up into a table?
Bill, I'll let you take the first stab at this, because I imagine your day-to-day, you see a lot of this going on with customers as they get into this mix here.
Yeah, I mean, I think what they're trying to do here is this is a model that was developed by a university to help with productivity and efficiency and user experience, and they're really kind of comparing or marrying, if you will, relating these various maturity levels of solutions to the appropriate process in digital workspace transformation. So, like the first maturity model is when you're the starting point, where you have a new or undocumented process. And what they recommend from a digital workspace perspective is that you do a quick win. You get the workspace up, you get it running, you get users in it. The objective, of course, is to utilize the Citrix Workspace with virtual apps and desktops, and the overall benefit is to help reduce overhead and control costs. But really, what this is doing is taking this model, this maturity model for capabilities of technology solutions from Carnegie Mellon University, and relate it to the digital workspace transformation process.
And guys, I'd be
we
curious.
see this a lot with we see this a lot with customers in you know, what we call it as phases. You know, you got to have a phase of introducing the technology, getting people comfortable with it, and then there's a second phase of now we've got the baseline technology. You know, example for us is now you've got people in the workspace. They're absorbing their applications, desktops, and files from Workspace. Now, let's turn on a micro app into Workday or something like that, and then we turn the micro app on. And then that gets, you know, every little step gets people's juices flowing, and you don't, you know, as I would say, information overload. You just don't drop all this on them. And what you notice when you follow a model like this, when you follow this maturity model, is if you take it in small steps and you feed it to the users in small steps, the adoption is a lot greater. Andy, you just mentioned this with, you know, onboarding your employees. You didn't have to force them to come to Teams. You kind of led them to Teams. You let them kind of drink it on their own. And I see that maturity model being a lot of ways. You know, we can't swing for the fence right off the bat. Let's walk before we run. And I think this is really cool for an adoption model, because this gives you a way of slowly digesting into the environment and making the technology as efficient as you can for the dollars that you're spending.
Yeah, I mean, this is crawl, walk, run in a summary, and if you wanted to really oversimplify it.
So, guys, I have a question for you, and based on this table, the way it's laid out, do you guys have specific examples of customers who were very mature in their Citrix life cycle, even if it was just virtual apps and desktops when the pandemic hit, versus ones that just tried to learn it all on the fly? And what types of scenarios and stories came out of that?
I could tell you a personal one if you want.
Go ahead.
So, well, you know, from where I came from, Carolina Neurosurgery and Spine Associates, you know, Andy, you know this, they adopted Citrix early on in my career. And, you know, the original adoption came out of a hardware refresh. You know, we had to replace 500 and something PCs at one time, you know, and that came because we built a building. When we built the building, everything was brand new. 5 years later, PCs had to be refreshed. PCs were expensive to buy, and I still think they're expensive to buy, you know, quality PCs that'll do what you need in a medical environment. So we were at a crossroads of, do we go with the thin client technology, or do we continue to fat client? Well, obviously we made the decision to go with Citrix, and we utilized it. When I left Citrix a year and a half ago, we were at about 90% adoption rate. And the places that we were not were for reasons of, like our accounting department, there were some of the things they needed to do, local printers, check scanners. There were very specific reasons why we couldn't adopt Citrix. But long story short, when the pandemic came, I didn't hear anything out of CNSA, and I had left there for about 3 months. So I assumed that when the pandemic would come, that they would reach out and, hey, how do we do X, Y, and Z? I never heard anything from them. And then about a month after the pandemic, I got a text message from the CEO, and it was simply thank you. And, I hadn't talked to her in a while, so I called Mary up and said, hey, what's the thank you for? And she said, just Citrix. We were able to send the majority of our employees home, get them back into the environment because they had worked in Citrix this whole time. It was nothing different to them. They were able to continue to do their job from home. So that was a big success of a Citrix customer that had adapted the technology early on, that when we crossed this pandemic bridge, it didn't affect the way they work. The only thing that was changed is instead of sitting in a cube inside of, one of their buildings, now that nurse is sitting at home on their PC, dialing back into the desktop they had always used. Now, I had other clients that had Citrix for very specific purposes. It did X in their world of X, Y, and Z. And when they attempted to leverage that to move from home, what they realized is that their infrastructure couldn't support that because they had never asked it to do that. And they've had to do things to, either whether it's moving the infrastructure to the cloud or beefing up the infrastructure. We've seen a lot of things there, but we have seen a lot of people move to Citrix because of the ease of getting people back in their environment, regardless of where their environment is these days.
Yep. Ben, that's a great example. So let me ask you a question. If I were to say today that we'll have another pandemic in the next 12 months, or more than likely, there was somebody who works at CNSA, they'll have a child or a family member sick and need to work remote. Which one's more likely?
I would think, they were going to need to leave the office because of pregnancy, or they needed to do something at home.
Yeah.
I hope. That's my hope.
But that's what I've been telling people for years, so that when if this major pandemic thing ever hit, the only difference is you have different stuff to worry about, but you can send person XYZ home and say, okay, just work like you did last Thursday when you work from home, or every third Friday when you work from home. It's the same thing.
But I think the point you're both making, sorry, Ben, here is this: if we relate all of this to this maturity model, the customers who were farther along in the maturity model had less to worry about when the pandemic hit. They were already through a lot of this. It's the ones that you mentioned at the end, Ben, that had perhaps put in Citrix for a tactical purpose, maybe a remote access solution, maybe a remote office solution, maybe a small work from home model. Number one, they had to scale up licensing. Number two, they had to scale up capacity, hardware capacity to support this. And then a lot of them were going back to the beginning of this capability model to have to go through all these adoption processes all over again because they hadn't adopted it more broadly initially. The customers who were farther along had a much easier time getting their employees to work remotely effectively and efficiently than those that didn't.
And what we're starting to see with this, and I love my on-prem customers. This is not a smack at you, but we're starting to see that same thing happen now to customers that have adopted cloud and customers that have not adopted cloud. The world is going to cloud. There's no doubt about that. And I hate to put the reality of that on my customers, but Pandora's box is out. Like, another thing I think is going to be interesting for HR departments in the next 36 months is people returning back to work. That's really undefined right now. And I think a lot of businesses are going to have to ask themselves, now that it's been proven that people can work from home and there's a way to measure that, how do you balance that? Employers are going to want that. They're going to want to mix like I do. I'm dying to go back to the office, but I can tell you, after being in the office a couple of days, I'm going to die to come back to my house. I want a 2 to 3 day mix. It's according to what's going on. If I got a busy week, put me in the office 3 days. If I don't have such a busy week, put me in the office 2 days a week. But give me a balance where I can continue to have this work from home experience, but also give me somewhere where I can retreat if I need to.
And that's what this is going to do, right? We're going to have hybrid, and it's going to be kind of when your company says you can, and it's also going to be when you want. And that's going to create a whole new world for user experience, and the technology is going to be driven by that.
Yes.
Yeah, no doubt. And the times they work. Like for me, I think Andy, you and I have always been a little bit the same. You know, I wake up early, I work, I get done about 5 o'clock, I go spend several hours with my family, but about 8 o'clock, 8:30, I return back to work, man. I mean, it's just something in healthcare I did because that was the time to be able to work on the system, but it's just in my DNA to want to wrap up my day, tie up any loose ends, yada, yada, yada. So, you know, man, Citrix gets their time out of me, but it's not always 8 to 5. Sometimes it's, you know, some of my best work's done between 10 and 12, you know, 10 p.m. and 12 a.m. So I think companies are also having to see that people work differently at different hours. And, you know, it's a 24-hour world, which means you literally can work anywhere in that 24 hours. It's now up to you. When are you most productive?
Right. Yeah, and I think that's one of the benefits for organizations is they get more work out of their people. Some people. It'll be interesting to see what I was at a lunch the other day, and this guy who studies productivity talked about how when the pandemic first hit, productivity went through the roof, and then now it's kind of bottomed out a little bit. It'll be interesting to see how people manage their people going forward. In a world like mine, where I have 45 employees that mostly all work remote, there's a lot of trust in that. And then that's where the big magical word of analytics starts to kick in. Yep. And you can start to really see who's working and who's not working.
Yeah.
Well, guys, we were a little concerned we wouldn't have enough to cover in 45 minutes when we went out and chose this blog to cover today, but we surely have. Any parting thoughts, Ben, before we let you go?
Yeah, I mean, one thing that, as you always say, cloud is an ambiguous term, and it's not cloud, it's clouds. What I like to refer to with Citrix Cloud is it's a platform. And, I have a lot of C-levels kind of challenge me on that and go, what do you mean when you say it's a platform? So what I mean when I say it's a platform is this really is a single pane of glass that will let you kind of tree out. It can be the trunk of your infrastructure that lets you tree out to other resources, whether those resources be on-prem or whether those resources be in a third-party data center like Peerpoint, or whether those resources be truly in the cloud like an Azure or a SaaS provider. What this platform does is give you the ability to kind of manage that whole environment from one pane of glass. We've seen customers get a lot of benefit out of their DR plan and it making their DR plans easier. So I know that, you guys attend these blogs. So one of the things I want to say is that we can help you with some of these things, and we can help you with some of these adoption models to make life easier for you, to flatten it out. And given the chance, looking at these adoption models and some of the things that are in these adoption models, we can help you get to a better state with your IT systems.
Yep. Bill, anything else you want to chime in with?
I think, and Ben said this in kind of a very similar way, but I think when you look at the workspace holistically, the objective here is to provide an experience for the employee, no matter what kind of worker they are, whether they need a virtual desktop, whether they just need virtual apps, whether they need SaaS apps, whether they're remote or back in the office. Let's use the same platform for them. So when they have to work from home, the experience is the same. If we give them that, then we will have broad adoption and continue to see the success of these solutions.
Yeah. Well, and I'll take that moment to hit upon something I brought up a minute ago, which is the analytics. The intent wasn't this, but I sent an email out with a read receipt to the entire company over the weekend. And it's interesting to watch the people who are just now getting to it at the middle of the day on Monday versus the ones who got to it over the weekend or first thing this morning. Not that it was a test, but it is interesting to have data like that, even if it's the old school way of doing it, just to see who's getting their email, who's starting, what time of day they're starting. But in this world of analytics and what we're talking about, new ways to work like this, we're going to get both. We're going to get happier users, and we're also going to get employers that can keep an eye on what's going on and have data to back up what they may have assumed or not assumed was happening.
Yeah.
All right. Well, guys, thanks for joining today, and we'll do it again next Monday. I'm not even sure what next Monday's topic is, but I know I've got about 8 weeks of content waiting on us. So we'll have something for sure, and hopefully our listeners will continue to get value out of us jumping on and talking like this. I appreciate it.
Oh yeah.
Very good, guys. I hope you guys all have a good week.
All right, guys. Thank you. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Ben.
Thank you, Andy.